Would you rather host the biggest sporting event on the planet, or actually pull it off without embarrassing yourself in front of the whole world? That's the question a lot of people outside the United States were quietly asking back when this tournament kicked off in Mexico City 6 weeks earlier. And now, with the trophy handed out at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, it's worth stepping back and asking the bigger question underneath the scoreline. Did America, as a host, manage to pull this off? And what did the millions of visitors who came through actually take home with them, beyond who won and lost? If you want more videos like this, breaking down what really happens when the world shows up on America's doorstep, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's a lot more to unpack from this tournament than just the final whistle. Let's get the actual result out of the way first, because it matters for everything that follows. This wasn't Argentina versus France. France got knocked out in the semifinal, beaten 2-0 by a Spain side that had not conceded more than a single goal in the entire tournament. So the final that the world actually watched was Spain against Argentina, the defending champions, with Lionel Messi chasing a second title that would have made one goal. That was the difference between Spain becoming double world champions, holding the men's and women's titles at the same time. A first in the sport's history, and Argentina becoming the first team since Brazil in the early 60s to defend the trophy back-to-back. So no, this wasn't the rematch some people expected. But in a way, that made it a pure test of the host country, because the drama on the pitch and the experience of the tournament off the pitch were two completely separate stories. And it's the second one, what happened off the pitch. Across 48 teams and 3 host nations over 6 weeks, that tells you something about America that the scoreline never could. Picture, for a second, a small group of traveling fans, say a cluster of them from Scotland, in the country for the first time, expecting the worst based on everything they'd absorbed from headlines back home about American gun violence, aggressive policing, and a culture that supposedly doesn't know how to have a good time without turning it into a fistfight. Now picture that same group, 3 days into their trip, sitting on a curb outside a stadium at midnight because they missed their ride, and a police officer pulls up, not to move them along, but to ask if they need a lift somewhere or a number for a cab. That's the kind of moment this genre of travel content lives on, and it's worth being upfront about something. Moments like that one are illustrative. They're the type of story that circulates constantly in travel vlogs and reaction videos every time a major tournament rolls through America. And they get stitched into videos like this one as a stand-in for a pattern that real travelers do report again and again, even if this exact version is not a specific person's verified account.
Americans, I need to apologise to you. Before I came to this country, I believed everything negative I saw in the news. American hospitality is definitely a real thing, guys, and I'm all here for it.
As a Brit in America, In-N-Out is amazing to me.
Why do British people come to America and feel blown away?
With that caveat on the table, the pattern itself is real enough to talk about. Surveys of international visitors to the U.S. consistently show that people rate the friendliness of ordinary Americans far higher than they expected going in. And hospitality researchers have long pointed out that this gap between expectation and experience is one of the most consistent findings in American tourism data. Now imagine a second scene. This one built around a family from somewhere near Lyon, in France, who show up at a diner outside Atlanta the morning after their team's brutal exit, looking like they've just watched a funeral. And imagine the guy at the next table, a total stranger, quietly telling the waitress to put their breakfast on his tab. No big speech, no cameras, just a gesture and back to his coffee. Again, this is the illustrative version of a story type, not a specific verified incident. But it captures something that shows up constantly in the informal, unofficial economy of American hospitality. The stranger who covers a check, the shopkeeper who throws in an extra item for free, the family that invites a lost-looking group of foreigners to their tailgate because they notice the confused look on their faces. European visitors who write up their trips afterward on travel blogs, on forums, in YouTube. Reaction videos filmed the moment they land back home bring this up disproportionately often compared to almost anything else.
You can't believe what I'm seeing right now.
Actually feels like I'm on a movie set. Like, what the fuck is going on?
Look at that truck, man. Yeah.
Cars do not have their number plates on the front, only the back.
I'm sure every Brit that moves to America says this, but these fire hydrants, they are just so American to us.
This is one of the most American things I've experienced so far. You can get free unlimited refills.
It's not that European countries lack kindness. It's that a lot of European social norms are built around not intruding on strangers, and Americans, for better or worse, intrude constantly, sometimes in exactly the way a homesick traveler needs. Would you rather live somewhere where strangers keep a respectful, comfortable distance, or somewhere where a stranger might just decide, uninvited, that today's your lucky day? There's no wrong answer, but it's worth noticing which one keeps showing up in the highlight reels foreign visitors post when they get home. Then there's the scale of the place, which is its own kind of culture shock, separate from anything to do with warmth or hospitality. A traveler from the Netherlands, a country you could drive across in about 3 hours, landing in Texas and being handed directions that casually include the phrase, "It's only about 4 hours to San Antonio," is a genuinely different relationship with distance than most Europeans have ever experienced. Picture that same traveler walking into a Buc-ee's off the interstate, one of those sprawling Texas gas station/convenience store complexes with dozens of fuel pumps and a store the size of a small supermarket, and audibly laughing at a wall of beef jerky that stretches farther than most European corner shops in total. It's a real category of store. It really is that large, and the reaction of overwhelmed amusement from first-time European visitors is one of the most consistently repeated beats in this entire genre of travel content, because the scale genuinely doesn't have a direct European equivalent.
Guys, I never realized how unfriendly and rude we Germans can be until I moved to the US. People here are so nice. Suddenly, people will greet you in the grocery store. They will say hi. They will smile at you. Strangers will stop and ask, "Hey, how's it going?" And when I first moved here, I was like, okay, what's going on? Like, this is suspicious. But the longer I stayed, I realized they're just being friendly. They're just nice for no reason. No conditions, no purpose.
It's not just gas stations. American supermarkets routinely stock refrigerators and freezers sized for what Americans consider a normal weekly shop, but strikes a lot of Europeans as stocking for a small siege. Portion sizes at restaurants are famously larger than what's standard across most of Western Europe. Plates, built around the assumption that leftovers are getting boxed up, not finished in one sitting. Pickup trucks on American highways dwarf anything you'd typically see hauling cargo through a European city center, where narrow medieval streets and steep fuel taxes have shaped vehicles toward the small and efficient for generations. And the stadiums themselves, several of which were built or expanded specifically for this tournament, seat crowds that rival small cities. Its abundance as an aesthetic, not just a fact, and whether you find it inspiring or excessive tends to depend entirely on which side of the Atlantic you grew up on. Which brings up the country's geography, something that's easy to underestimate until you're standing in the middle of it. A tourist from Sweden, a country that already thinks of itself as spread out, discovering that the drive from Miami to Seattle would take longer than driving across most of Europe, tends to have a real recalibration of what big even means. The continental United States spans 4 standard time zones. It contains deserts, glaciers, swamps, and mountain ranges that would each be a national talking point in a smaller country. And here they're often treated as regional curiosities. National parks like Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon draw visitors who arrive expecting a nice afternoon and leave having burned an entire vacation day just getting from one viewpoint to the next. And for European travelers whose sense of historical depth is tied to castles and cathedrals built centuries ago, there's a strange kind of humbling that happens when you're standing at the edge of a canyon that's been forming for millions of years, or looking up at sequoia trees that were already centuries old when Rome was still an empire. Scale, it turns out, doesn't have to be measured in centuries of human history to feel enormous. Safety is where the expectation gap tends to be widest, and honestly, the most emotionally loaded. A lot of international visitors arrive with a media-shaped picture of American cities as dangerous in a constant ambient way. Headline stories about violence traveling much farther and much faster than the day-to-day reality of walking around a stadium district on match day. Picture a German fan, someone who followed American gun violence statistics closely enough back home to genuinely hesitate before booking the trip, walking through a heavily secured fan zone in Los Angeles and finding it calmer and more orderly than some of the crowd control at matches back in Germany. Local police, deployed in huge numbers for a tournament of this size, are often reported by tourists as approachable and even good-humored, posing for photos, directing lost fans, occasionally joking around with the crowd rather than looming over it. None of that erases the country's real and well-documented challenges with gun violence. That's a separate, serious conversation, and not one this kind of tournament coverage should paper over. But the lived experience of a tourist inside a heavily secured World Cup fan zone is a genuinely different environment than the national statistics might suggest. And that gap between the two is exactly the kind of thing that shows up again and again in post-trip reflections from European visitors. Would you rather visit a country with a spotless statistical safety record, or a country where the actual ground-level experience, in the actual neighborhoods you're actually walking through, feels safer than the headlines led you to expect? It's not really a fair question, because both things can be true about the same country depending on where you stand, and that contradiction is a lot of what makes America confusing to visit and easy to misjudge from a distance. Money is where the stories get more concrete and more personal. Take a hypothetical bartender working stadium events in Nashville during the tournament, the kind of worker this genre of video loves to feature, who tells a visiting reporter or vlogger that a good match night and tips alone can outpace what a full week pays in some service jobs back in Europe. That's the sort of claim worth treating with real caution, because tipping culture, the absence of guaranteed minimum wages for tipped workers in many U.S. states, and the lack of the kind of universal health care or paid leave that's standard across most of Western Europe make American income numbers deceptively hard to compare directly. A high hourly tip total in Nashville doesn't automatically mean a better standard of living than a lower, steadier wage in Paris or Berlin, once healthcare costs, education costs, and vacation time get factored back in. What is fair to say, without needing invented numbers to make the point, is that the U.S. has a genuinely different economic model, higher potential upside for some workers and consumers, thinner social safety nets underneath it, and a housing and healthcare system that operates on completely different assumptions than most of the countries these tournament visitors are flying in from. It's a real trade-off, not a simple win for either side, and it's one that plenty of European visitors end up thinking about a lot more seriously after actually talking to American workers than they did before they landed. Patriotism is maybe the single hardest thing for a lot of European visitors to get used to, because it operates on a completely different emotional register than most of Europe's relationship with national identity, which for well-documented historical reasons tied to the 20th century tends to be more muted, more self-conscious, more likely to express itself through irony than sincerity. An American crowd of 80,000 people singing the national anthem before kickoff, hand over heart, without a trace of embarrassment, tends to land somewhere between moving and bewildering for a first-time European visitor. Small towns along the tournament route hung flags off literally every porch for weeks. Local businesses painted murals celebrating the visiting countries right alongside American flags. A strange, sincere mixture of hosting pride and self-pride running in parallel rather than in competition. It's easy to read this from a distance as simple nationalism, and sometimes that critique is fair. But a lot of visiting fans who actually spent time in these towns came away describing something closer to a kind of civic warmth, a country that's unapologetic about liking itself, in a way that Europe, still working through its own 20th century, generally isn't. Food culture might be the most immediately visceral part of the culture shock, because it hits you before you've even had time to think about geography or economics. It hits you at the first meal. Picture a Dutch or Belgian tourist ordering what they assume is a normal breakfast at a diner in the Midwest, and receiving a plate that could reasonably feed 2 people, alongside a bottomless cup of coffee that gets refilled without being asked. Tipping culture itself is its own small culture, shock, the expectation of 15 to 20% on top of the bill, baked into the service economy in a way that doesn't really exist anywhere in most of Western Europe, where service is simply included in the price, and tipping is a small optional gesture rather than a structural expectation. Drive-through culture, the sheer number of fast food and coffee options built specifically around never leaving your car, is its own point of fascination for visitors from cities built around walking and public transit. None of this is universally better or worse. It's just a different set of defaults, built around cars, space, and portion sizes that Europe's older, denser cities were never built to accommodate. By the time the final whistle blew at MetLife Stadium and Spain lifted the trophy, a lot of the European visitors who'd arrived skeptical, expecting crime, expecting rudeness, expecting a country too big and too loud to actually enjoy, were posting some version of the same sentiment, that they'd underestimated the place. Not uncritically, nobody who spends 6 weeks traveling through American cities comes away thinking every stereotype was wrong. The economic trade-offs are real. The gun violence conversation is real and serious. The infrastructure gaps in public transit compared to most of Europe are real, and plenty of visitors complained loudly about them. But the specific, personal experience of hospitality, of scale, of a kind of loud sincerity that Europe has mostly trained itself out of, that seemed to catch a lot of first-time visitors off guard, tournament after tournament, city after city. So here's the question this video actually wants to leave you with. Would you rather live in a place that's careful, reserved, and quietly competent, or a place that's chaotic, oversized, and occasionally embarrasses itself, but somehow still manages to make a stranger feel like family by the end of the night? Most people, if they're honest, want a little bit of both, and maybe that's really the whole story of how this tournament played out. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, do the usual, like it, share it with someone who'd enjoy it, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there's a lot more from this tournament still worth digging into. Before you go, a quick and honest note on what you just watched. This video is a piece of narrative commentary built around the real outcome of the 2026 World Cup final, Spain defeating Argentina, combined with illustrative, composite-style anecdotes representative of the kinds of stories that circulate in travel content and tourist reaction videos around major American events, rather than verified individual testimonials. Names, specific dollar figures, and specific personal stories described here should be understood as representative examples, not documented facts about real, named individuals. It does not represent the complete social reality, economic reality, or official policy position of the United States or any country discussed, and it isn't intended as immigration, financial, or travel advice. If a specific claim in this video matters to you, cost of living, safety statistics, healthcare comparisons, please look up the current primary source rather than relying on this video alone. Thanks for watching.